So now I've jumped back to my virtual machine, my machine running SQL Server. I'm going to run the AF client install. Now the AF client does require that you have the PySDK installed, and it would be a good idea with this PySDK installed that you've made sure that it's defaulting to the Pi server that you're going to be using AF with. So let's go ahead and proceed, and we'll see what's already installed and what is not installed, whether we're going to be installing the SDK or not. I believe that's already on this machine, but I still want to verify that it's pointing to the right Pi server. Yeah, here we go. What this is telling us is of the required components, let's see, some runtime distributables are already there. Yeah, here we go, the Pi software development kit. Now that's going to be the 32-bit version. Yeah, we also have a 64-bit version that's not required in this case because we're using 32-bit in this case. It says it's installed. I'm not going to trust that it's installed properly there, so what I'm going to do is just double check. I'll go into the Pi system here under SMT or Pi SMT, or actually about Pi SDK. That'll tell us what our current connections are pointing us to in terms of Pi servers. So I'll go into Pi SDK, about Pi SDK. Let's take a look at the connections. Yeah, currently this is not configured to connect to any specific Pi server. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that we are configured to go to a specific Pi server. I'll go ahead and add a new Pi server. Now you may not have to do this, of course. If you've got a copy of the SDK, then chances are it's already pointing to the right server. If not, then during the install, you're going to be asked to configure a server. So point yourself to the Pi server that you're going to be connecting to. Now in this case, I'm connecting to a server that I know mostly by its IP address. This is an internal IP address, of course. And my default username I'm going to choose is PyDemo. Or I can alternately choose to connect as a regular Pi user with normal security settings. PyDemo is a demo account that we use in training. Okay, so as you can see, I was able to connect as PyDemo. So what I've got now is a properly configured connection using the Pi SDK, and I'm ready to go ahead and proceed. As I said, if the SDK had not been installed, that would be an installation that you would have to do at that point. If it is already installed, just make sure it's pointing to the right server like I just did. I'll go ahead and continue. This is going to install that Pi AF client. Now it's going to be asking me what the name of my AF server is. Remember, I'm not on the AF server now. I'm back on that virtual machine, that SQL Server box. So at some point it's going to ask me that. Let me go ahead and acknowledge that as the default directory. And so here's where we specify the name of the AF server. Now in this case, the name of the AF server is, well, in this case it's the name of that computer, NICGX280. That was the name of my AF server. That's going to be the default node for my AF server. I'm going to go ahead and do a typical installation. You'll notice though, if you do choose custom, not much to it really. You just have the choice between putting the documentation on or not. I'll just go ahead and choose typical, and I'll go ahead and do the install. Now I put in NICGX280 as my default AF server. That's the AF server, remember, not the Pi server. I'm sorry, we got servers coming out the ears here, but the AF server that's where I just installed with the AF server install, what we're calling the AF server, which is kind of the overlay, the asset database. The Pi server is where the actual data is stored. So, and the two are different. So, and we'll illustrate that as we go through. So it looks like that worked properly. Now the true finish to this, or the big finish to this, is to go ahead and start the Pi AF Explorer and see if everything works properly. I'll go into Pi System, or excuse me, the Pi System Explorer. It's not called the AF Explorer. The Pi System Explorer should allow me to connect to the AF server that I just specified. As you can see, it knows what the name of that AF server is, NICGX280. It's looking for the default database. and it's not there. I do need to provide some credentials. These are going to be Windows credentials. So I'll go ahead and put in my username and password. But it's trying to connect to my default database, but there is no default database. And that's normal. So it's one of the few times you'll see something like this, was not found, and it's all good news. That simply means that this is a brand new AF database. I need to select a default server or a default database. There is no default database that I can select other than the one that we reserved for configuration. So at this point, what you should do, the proper thing to do, is just create a new database. Now this is, this is going to be, I suppose, the database. If this is a production system, then think carefully what you name this. This is what people are going to be connecting to for the next few years. In this case, I'm going to call this a database that we're using in this class. And in this class, what we do typically when we meet for real in a regular classroom is we just call it student and then put a student number, student 01 database, for example. So that's going to be the name of my database. Now, of course, I just want to warn you, in some of the things that you'll see, the screen prints and some of the videos, you may see a system with many different AF databases. This configuration is just kind of like a reserved one that we use for a lot of configuration purposes, but this is the actual AF database. I don't think it's really typical to see a customer who's got many different AF databases. It's typically just one AF database that you use to represent the assets in your organization. But you'll see sometimes in our examples we have many different ones we use for different testing purposes and examples. So once I am able to do that, there we go. It looks like we've got a new AF database. I can start creating elements or adding to the library, etc. There's an optional part of this exercise, and that is to change the security that's happening over on the AF server. To go back to the AF server, I've just switched out of my SQL Server computer and I'm back on my AF server. If you look at the services applet, this is a little services applet that shows us the PyAF server application itself, or the PyAF server service. If we look at its properties, it's currently logging on using this network service security. And let's just say in our situation we don't allow that. We would prefer that somebody log on as a domain user. And that's how, we don't permit using connections across the network that are not using domain credentials. So if we want to do that, there's some changes that we need to make in a couple places. Let's go back, take a look at our SQL Server first. I'm back on our SQL Server machine now. And first I'll just close out of the PySystem Explorer. We don't need to be looking at this right now. And I'll go into Administrative Tools under Computer Management. I'm going to be going after the user groups. And so under here, under Local Users and Groups, what I'm looking for is the group that was created called AF Server. That was actually created during the AF install. As you can see, the only member of this group right now is not a user at all. It's a computer. It's the AF server. And I don't want that. We don't want to grant access based on the name of the computer. We want access based on the domain user. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. By the way, this is probably a good time to remind you, if this is not your policy, if it's not your policy to disallow all but domain credentials for making connections across computers, please don't do this. The only reason we're doing this, I've cleared this out, is to demonstrate how to do it. And this is the type of training where you're basically I'm just show you how to do something that you would only do once at a site. So this isn't something you typically have to do, if you're even going to do it at all. So the next thing we have to do, so with that said, let's go through and do some more of these obscure things. Let's go back and let's go into the SQL Server Management Studio and get rid of a couple of security profiles that are defined there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and log in now. The name of the SQL Server is this AF class VM NICD, as I said. I'll go ahead and connect. It's going to be using Windows authentication, so since I'm logged in as a Windows user, this should go smoothly. Once I'm logged in, well, first of all, let me make this a little smaller so we can see everything on one screen. Yeah, here's our SQL Server Management Studio options. The option we're looking for is under Databases. We're looking for this database right here that's called PyFD. That's the database that's created when we install AF. And what we're going to do from here is we're going to basically undo what the install did by adding a security schema that allowed this NT authentication. Yeah, there we go. Notice one of the authentication methods here is this NT authentication network service, and that's what we don't want. So I'm going to right click on that, delete it. You'll see this appears, and we'll just go ahead and say yes. We'll confirm that delete. Okay, next up, let's go back up to the basically the instance, this AF class MD, and under there's a, not under databases, we were just there. Under there's a security. Under security, there's a logins. What we need to do is choose again this NT Authority Network Service, and I'll choose that. Choose the properties, and under user mapping, we need to clear this field right here, this PyFD. So you can see that's yet another place in which we're undoing what was done during the install and disallowing that connection. So we're almost finished now that we've updated SQL Server on here. Let's go back to our AF server. On the AF server, we need to change that service so that it tries to log on as a Windows user. I'll go ahead and bring up my AF server, and on the AF server, in the Services applet, I'll go into Properties, under Log On. This is where we're going to be specifying a user and a password, and this is going to be a domain user, so I'll go ahead and use my domain credentials. Make sure I type in my password correctly. I'll go ahead and apply. There we go. And it even warns you what the step you'll see in the instructions is at this point we do have to stop and restart this service. Now if it restarts properly, let me go ahead and stop it. If it restarts properly and makes the connection and we don't see any error, then we have some success. What we should be able to see is, well, this is successfully connected to the server, that AF or SQL server in the other box.